Hey, this is Danny from Plug and Play. Today we have a nifty tutorial about how to make this curtain transition inside of After Effects. This is going to be an effect where you can embed your logo on top of the curtain so it looks like it's moving with it. As you may notice, we're going through a little bit of a rebrand right now, so hope you guys enjoy. Let's get right into it. So we're inside of After Effects here, and I have this new composition. I named it Curtain Transition, and as you can see, it's 1920 by 1080, it's 30 frames per second, and it's about 10 seconds long. So once we have that main composition set up, let's go ahead and make a new composition, and we can call this guy Map. Let's make that half of the width of our original composition, so we can just do divided by 2, and then we can leave it at 30 frames per second and 10 seconds long as well. Once we're inside of this new map composition, let's make a new shape layer, and let's look up an effect called Fractal Noise. Let's drag that to our new shape layer. Let's change the fractal type to be turbulent smooth, and then let's go into transform, uncheck uniform scaling, and let's change the scale height to be 4200. Alright, so now we're starting to look more curtainy-ish, but let's go ahead and let's add an effect called Bezier Warp to this. And I know that we're only a little bit into this tutorial, but this is going to be the hardest part, is getting this Bezier Warp to transition on this fractal noise in a way that it looks like a curtain. So let's go ahead and add keyframes to all of these guys here. Let's hit U, and let's select all of them, and let's shift them forward about 30 frames. Now that we have all of those original keyframes shifted forward about 30 frames, we can go and start animating and positioning these vertices for where we want the original position of the curtain to be. So let's go ahead and let's start dragging these guys all the way over to the right over here. Now we don't ever want to overlap them. As an instance, we don't ever want to have this vertice cross this, this further one on the right over here. So let's just smush them all down over into this right hand side over here. And we want to cover up about 1/6 of this composition here. So I think that's going to do it for me right there. So if we play this back how it stands currently, it looks pretty boring. It looks like it's just animating on like through scale. And we want to have this look like it's a curtain being drawn across the screen. And the way that we're going to accomplish that is we want to have this top left vertice animating on first, as if there's like some rails on top of here that's actually driving this curtain to fall across the screen, and that means that we want to have this this top left vertice animate on first. So let's go ahead and select this top left vertice, and a good way to find the associating keyframe for that point is to select that point and just start dragging it around. And as you can see, I made a new keyframe here, and that means that these keyframes on the top left vertex are associated to this point. So we can go ahead and undo that, and let's go ahead and select every keyframe but these top two right here, and let's shift these forward about 2 frames. Great. Now let's find the keyframe associated to this point right here. And so as you can see, it's going to be these bottom sets of keyframes. So we can select everything but those bottom sets of keyframes, and let's shift those forward 2 frames as well. And let's do the same thing for this point right here. So now if we play it back, you can see that we're starting to get some type of fabric animation where the bottom half of this is trailing behind the top half, and that's going to give us this kind of fluid effect going on. So now that we have this left side set up, let's go ahead and let's set up all these middle points here. And we want this to be so that these keyframes here on the top left are animating on first, these guys down here are following, and these keyframes in the middle are trailing even more so behind that. So let's find these keyframes associated to these points here. So let's go about 10 frames forward after our ending keyframes here, and let's start finding all of the keyframes associated to these middle points here. So we can just start moving these just a little bit, just so that we're generating keyframes on those existing keyframes. And as you can see, I now know what keyframes are associated to those points based on what new keyframes are made down here. So now let's select all of these points associated to those new keyframes that we made, and let's shift all of these keyframes about 2 frames forward. Great. We can delete these old keyframes here that we used to find what points we're looking for. Now let's select back on our Bezier Warp effect, and let's move these keyframes back here even more further back. So we can go ahead, find these guys, select them, And let's move these back again. And we can delete these new keyframes that we added. And now we're starting to get some kind of effect going on here that looks like a curtain's being drawn across the screen. Let's go ahead, let's select all of our points. Let's right click on them. Let's go to Keyframe Assistant and then Easy Ease. Now to sell this effect even more, let's go ahead and select these last keyframes in our timeline here, and let's shift these out about 5 more frames. And then let's go ahead and select these very last 2 keyframes, and we'll bring these out about 2 more frames. Let's select all 4 of these ending keyframes here. Let's go into our graph editor, and let's bring in these Bezier handles a little bit here, maybe something like there. And then let's see what we're looking at. Pretty good. Let's go ahead and go back into our Fractal Noise. I'm going to change the width to be 200 here. And then inside of Evolution, let's right click on Evolution and let's do time times 20. Okay, let's go ahead and let's make a new composition, and we can call this logo. Let's make this 1920 by 1080. And I'll just do some example text in here, but this is going to be where you throw in your logo. So I'll just do the end. We'll center that in our composition here. And let's make another new composition, and let's call this our logo. And let's set the width to be half the width. And then let's drag in our new logo composition here and make sure it's right aligned. Now let's go back into our map layer, and let's go ahead, we can rename this to be right map. So I'll just do our map. And let's select this Bezier Warp effect and copy it. Let's go back into our R logo, and let's make a new adjustment layer. And let's paste that Bezier Warp onto there. So now we're getting the same movement on this logo layer that we have on our map effect. Great. Let's go back into our main composition here, and let's start dragging in some compositions. So we're going to be using both the R logo and the R map. Let's drag those guys in here. Let's make them right aligned to the composition. And let's go onto our map, and let's look up an effect called Caustics. Yeah, we're using Caustics again, that's right. Let's go ahead and let's set the bottom to be our logo, and let's set the water to be our map. Let's set the surface opacity to be 0. And then let's jump back into our R logo real quick, and let's add a new shape layer. We'll send that below the adjustment layer, and let's go ahead and let's change the color of this to be something that looks like a curtain. I'm thinking this red looks pretty good, so we'll just leave it as that. Let's go back to our curtain transition, and let's go ahead and hide this R logo, and let's duplicate this R map. Let's go ahead and let's set the surface opacity to be 100, and we'll set the surface color to be something in this mid-tone gray right here. Great. Let's go ahead and let's change the blending mode to be overlay. Let's go ahead and add an effect called set matte. And what set matte does, it basically just mimics the track matte effect on any layer. So you can choose whatever matte you want to be taking, but in this instance, we're just going to leave it as our map. Let's look up an effect called brightness and contrast. Let's add this to the R map layer here. And now we can start really messing around with how much of these highlights and shadows we want. So we can increase the brightness, we can increase the contrast, but feel free to fiddle around with it to your heart's content. Let's go back up into Caustics real quick. Let's change the water smoothing to be 10. And let's change the refractive index to be 0.6. Let's go into this bottom one, and let's change the smoothing to be 10. And let's set the refractive index to be 0.6 as well. Alright, now that we have the right side of this curtain transition set up, let's go ahead and let's set up the left side. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and let's select both the right map and the right logo in our project panel, and let's duplicate those guys. Let's rename them to be L logo, and let's rename this to be L map. Let's go inside of L map, let's right click, and let's make a new adjustment layer. Let's add a transform effect to this adjustment layer. And inside of the transform effect, let's uncheck this uniform scale, and let's put a negative in front of this scale width. And that's just going to flip the whole thing around so that instead of the curtain map coming in from the right, it's now coming in from the left. So we can go ahead and let's copy this adjustment layer. Let's go back to our project window, and let's open up this L logo. Let's paste that adjustment layer inside of here, and just like with the map, it's now coming in from the left, but the only issue is that instead of the logo being the right orientation, it's now flipped around. So let's go inside of our logo composition, and let's make a new, very skinny shape layer. And let's make this something that stands out from that red, so this purple should do it. Let's go ahead and let's center that in the composition. And the purpose of this is just to reference exactly where the center of this composition is, so that when we are lining up that logo in the L logo composition, it makes it super easy. Let's go back into the L logo, and let's go to this first adjustment layer, go into the effect controls, let's copy this transform effect, and let's paste that onto this logo. Now let's start dragging this logo composition to the right until we find that that new shape layer that we drew in here is aligned just on the right side here. So something right there should probably be good for us. We can go back into our logo composition. We can delete this shape layer now. Let's go back into our main composition here, and let's bring in both the L logo and the L map. We can bring this R logo to the bottom, and we can hide this L logo and bring that to the bottom as well. Let's go inside of this first R map, and let's grab this Caustics effect. Let's paste that onto this L map here. Let's set the bottom of this new Caustics effect to be L logo, and let's set the water to be L map. We can go ahead and align this to the left, and now let's duplicate this L map, and let's go inside of this top R map here, and let's grab the set matte and the brightness and contrast, copy those guys, and let's paste that onto this new top L map here. Inside of Caustics, let's go ahead and set that color to be the same gray color that we had before, and we'll set the surface opacity to be 100. And just like the last one, let's change the blending mode to be overlay. One last thing, let's make sure that inside of this top L map, we set the take matte from layer to be L map. Now, since we probably don't want this curtain to be the same curtain as the one on the right, let's go inside of the L map, and let's go into this shape layer, let's go into Fractal Noise, and let's twirl down this evolution options, and instead of random seed, let's just put this to be like 11. And this is just going to change things up so that we have a little bit of a difference between the left and the right side of this curtain transition. So as you can see, we have a different curtain in there now. And we can fiddle around with that. You can obviously change those evolution seeds to be anything that you want, and just keep going until you find something that you like. But I think this should do it for us. One last thing that we can do to complete this transition, we can go ahead and let's set some keyframes on the L map and R map. So I parented the top L map to this bottom L map, and then I parented this top R map to the bottom R map. So let's go ahead and let's set some keyframes on the position. And let's send these keyframes about 15 frames out. And then we can drag these so that both of these are off the screen to begin with. So if you're just looking to close curtains and you don't want these to open up, then we're pretty much done with this effect. Obviously, there's a lot of room to tweak stuff and play with the colors, the logo, whatever you need to do. It's super easy. But to open the curtains, that's a whole different story, and we're about to get into that. So in order to get these curtains to open again after they've already been closed, let's go inside of our R map here, select all of our Bezier Warp keyframes, copy them, and then paste them. And then once we have them pasted, let's right click on them, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then Time Reverse Keyframes. You may notice I deleted these middle keyframes here, and that's because these are associated to the points on the right over here, and they're staying stagnant throughout this animation, so we won't be needing them. Once you have your keyframes time reversed, let's go ahead and play this through. You can see that right off the bat we're looking pretty good. The only big thing that's going on that we don't want to have happen is if you notice this leftmost point is overlapping this middle left point, and we do not want that to happen. So in order to fix that, let's go ahead and let's select these sets of keyframes here, and also these right here. And these are associated to these middle points in the middle. Let's go ahead and let's shift these back, and we want them to line up with this first keyframe right here. After that's done, let's select these middle two, and if these are associated to this right middle point and this bottom right middle point, and we can shift these forward about 2 frames. One last thing that we want to do, let's take this top left vertex keyframe and let's shift that forward right to here. So looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and let's copy this Bezier Warp effect. Let's go into our R logo. Let's go into the adjustment layer. Let's go to the beginning of a timeline and let's delete this Bezier Warp and paste in our new one. And we're going to do this for all of our compositions here. So same thing goes for this shape layer here on the L map. We'll delete the Bezier Warp, paste in our new one, and same thing with L logo. Make sure that you're at the beginning of the timeline because that's where the keyframes are going to be pasted. We'll go back to our curtain transition. So you might notice that we have this little bit of missing pixels down here, and the easiest way to fix that, if we just go into the associated map, let's go into scale, and let's just set the scale to be 100.3. One other thing that you might notice that's going on, it's pretty hard to see, but we have this little bit of black alpha that's leaking into our scene here. It's really hard to notice, but an easy way to fix that is to make a new adjustment layer. Let's look up levels. Let's add a levels to this adjustment layer. Let's set the channel to be alpha, and let's just set this slider a little bit further out, and that's going to get rid of that leaking alpha there. One last thing that I've already gone ahead and done is to copy these position keyframes on the both left map and right map and paste them down here and then time reverse them. So that just means that once this curtain is coming to the end, we have an easy way for that to transition off the screen here. And that's it. It's super easy to change out the logo. Just jump into the logo comp, and let's say you want to throw your own logo in there. You can just delete this the end text, throw in your logo, and then it'll automatically populate inside of this composition. So there's so many different ways that you can play around with this effect. You can increase the smoothing, the wave height. If you want some more defined wrinkles in your curtain, you can go inside of these different maps. And something that's really cool that I tend to do sometimes is I usually go to the Fractal Noise and I turn down the contrast as this is opening up. So as we go further along here, once the animation has opened up, once the curtains have come across the screen, we can decrease that contrast, and that'll kind of give the effect that the wrinkles are kind of going away as we move further along of this curtain opening. So like I said, so many different ways to play around with this. Really get in there, try all these different effects, Caustics on the Fractal Noise, change the colors around, the contrast and brightness on these overlay compositions here. So much stuff to do. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed. Like we say with all of our tutorials, just get in there and experiment as much as possible. And if you find something really cool, please share it with us. If you like our videos and you want to see more of them, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Anyways, we'll catch you in the next one.